Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, we're going to go ahead and remove all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now the next thing that we're going to do is take a small pry bar. I'm going to carefully get in between this area here and gently pry it. Essentially what I want to do is just push back this piston in here just enough that when we remove the caliper, it should come off of the rotor easily. There we are. I can move this around. Now let's make our way up to the flex hose. I'm going to go ahead and restrict flow, leading down to the caliper. Now we can start taking off the Banjo bolt. That's the bolt that holds the flex hose to the caliper. For that, I'm going to use an 11mm. Make sure you have a nice collection bucket underneath this area to collect any of that brake fluid that might come out of it. Remove that Banjo bolt, give it a quick inspection. Let's set this stuff aside. Now at this point, I always just put a rubber boot inside of this area here. That's just to prevent any fluid from making its way out while we continue removing our 2 15mm headed caliper bracket bolts. There's one bolt. I'm just going to put this one in. We'll leave it in a couple threads. Now we can fully remove our top bolt. Now we can go ahead and start removing both of those mounting bolts. Carefully remove the caliper. And now we can go over to the bench to remove our brake pads. Now on the bench, we can go ahead and grab onto the pad. I'm just going to push from the outer aspect. We can push this right on through. Give your brake pads a quick inspection. Obviously, you want to make sure there's plenty of meat. Do the same for the inner pad. Now we can turn it up on its front. The next thing we want to do is go ahead and remove our 2 15mm caliper slider bolts. Go ahead and pull out those slider pins. Separate your caliper. Now we can go ahead and remove our caliper tins. You're going to want to give these a quick inspection. Now typically they're going to have rust and debris all over them, so you're going to want to make sure you clean them up with something. As you can tell, these look like they're pretty clean, so you don't have to worry about it in this case. Pop that right off of there. We can set our caliper bracket aside. Okay, now it's time to get ready to prepare our brand new caliper. I'm going to stand it up on its front and we can start removing our 2 caliper slider pins. Now we can start preparing that caliper bracket. You're going to want to use a little bit of high temperature caliper grease inside this area and along this one right here. Then of course we can put our tin right onto this area and then we'll go ahead and do the same exact thing on the other side of the bracket. Slide that down on there. Give it a little wiggle to make sure it's secure. Before we go ahead and mount our brand new caliper, you want to make sure you clean up the mounting bolt thread. After we clean it up, we'll use some red thread locker. All right, I've got them cleaned up with some red thread locker. We can go ahead and take our bracket, we'll slide it into position. Start in both of these mounting bolts, we'll bottom them out, and then when we torque each of these, we're going to torque them to 137 foot-pounds. Now it's going to be time to install our brake pads. The pad that has the wear indicator is the inboard pad, or the one that's on the inside aspect. So you're going to pay attention to each of the ears on the pad and slide it into the area on the bracket where it needs to be. Once you've slid it in, go ahead and wiggle it around. Make sure that it does function properly. It needs to be able to move away, press up against that rotor, and be able to move away when you release the brakes. Let's do the same thing for that outer pad. Slide it right in, make sure it wiggles around. Now it's going to be time to start preparing the muscle part of the caliper. This is the area with the piston. Let's take a little bit of high temperature caliper grease and we're just going to put a nice coating just on the metal aspect of that piston. Once you've got that safely coated, let's go ahead and do the same thing on the back side of each of these ears. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now let's go ahead and coat those caliper slider pins. We're going to coat the entire shaft of the pin, but we're also going to make our way up and into this groove right up along here. That's the area where the boot's going to ride, and it's super important to help make sure that no moisture or debris make its way inside. Do the same on both pins. Now we can slide that caliper into position. Just slide it right over the brake pads. Now you want to pay attention to the slider boots. Essentially just make sure they're in the proper position so we can slide those pins through. Take those pins, slide them right on through. Now we can bottom each of these bolts out and then we'll torque them to 63 foot-pounds. Next, it's going to be time to start reattaching our brake flex hose. The area that you want to pay attention to is the area where that banjo bolt or connecting bolt goes through. Now, if you were to look at the bolt itself on this one, you can see that I still have my copper gasket still on it. But there should be one on both sides of this flex hose. So of course, you're going to want to make sure you take a look at both sides and just make sure it doesn't have one of those gaskets. Assuming they're both off of there, go ahead and wipe it down. Give it a quick inspection to make sure it doesn't look like it's worn or damaged in any way. And now we can grab our new banjo bolt with our new crush washers. Let's take that banjo bolt with one of our new washers, slide it right on there. Now we're going to take this, slide it right on through the flex hose. Take our other new gasket, we'll slide it on there. Now we're going to connect this in along the back side of the caliper. Go ahead and bottom that out. Once you have that snug, go ahead and torque that to 32 foot-pounds. Now let's move up here, remove our hose restriction. The next thing we're going to do is move down here to our bleeder screw. You're going to notice right on the end of the bleeder screw there's a boot on it. Go ahead and carefully pull that off of there. We're going to set this aside because you will be using this. All right, now with that out of the way, let's have focus on our bleeder screw right here. This is what we're going to be using, a 10mm headed wrench to loosen up. But before we do that, let's make our way under the hood. From under the hood, you're going to want to pay attention to the master cylinder. This is the area that holds your brake fluid. You want to make sure that you're nice and full on brake fluid, and then go ahead and hop inside the passenger compartment and pump up the brake pedal until it starts to feel as though it's getting firm. Now let's get back over to the caliper, and we're going to get ready to open up the bleeder screw. Obviously, you want to make sure that you have hand and eye protection and, of course, a collection receptacle underneath this area so you can recycle the fluid when you're done. We'll use our 10mm wrench. Go ahead and open up the bleeder screw right here. And now we're going to do something called gravity bleeding. Essentially, we're going to let gravity draw fluid all the way down to this caliper through all the brake lines from that master cylinder. Once we see a steady trickle of fluid coming from here, we can go ahead and close it and proceed with a manual bleed. So at this point, as you can tell, coming off of my gloved finger, I have a steady trickle of fluid coming out of this. I'm just going to go ahead and close this off. Now at this point, we're going to continue on with our manual bleed. For this, it's going to be easiest with two people. The person that's inside the vehicle is going to have to pump up the brake, and when they do it, it's going to be 3 times very slowly, and on the last pump, they're going to hold it. They're going to let me know they're holding it, and I'll open up this bleeder screw. We're going to be paying attention for air and fluid coming out of this bleeder screw. All right, so on the first turn right there, it almost looked like no air came out of this, but I'm going to go ahead and double check. Go ahead and pump it up again. All right, now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open this up again, and we're going to be watching for air to come out. I saw a few squirts of air, so we're going to have to continue. Go ahead and pump. Okay. Now that last time, I didn't see any air bubbles coming out of there. It's a good habit to go ahead and do it one last time just to double check. Let's pump it again. Now assuming you didn't see any air 2 times in a row, you should be good to go. Now once you've done that, make your way back to the master cylinder and just double check to make sure you're up to the maximum line. Generally, you can just go ahead and give your fluid reservoir a wiggle, and you can see that you're there. If you're not, just go ahead and turn this cap counterclockwise, lift it up, and you can see right on the top, it says to use .3 brake fluid. Pour it right in the top, make sure you close it up when you're done. Put on your boot. Clean your mess. Let's go ahead and get this lug nut out of the way, grab our wheel, get ready to put that on. Now let's go ahead and start on all 5 of our lug nuts. We'll bottom them out, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. Let's torque those lug nuts. Okay friends, we got our brake caliper done. What's left to do now? Now of course you're going to want to make sure you close the hood, take it for a road test, make sure your brakes are functioning properly. Thanks for watching.